All right. Moving on to our next session on the WorldCat Metadata API, I'd like to introduce Hayley Moreno, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm delighted to introduce Kelley McGrath. Kelley is the Metadata Management Librarian at the University of Oregon. She's an experienced media cataloger and has been active in the organization Online Audiovisual Catalogers, also known as OLAC, for many years. She is currently OLAC's liaison to CCDA and a member of the PCC Standing Committee on Standards. Kelley is particularly interested in ways to make library metadata more useful for humans and machines, and ways to design discovery interfaces to make better use of library metadata. So without further ado, please welcome Kelley McGrath.
Hi, so I was asked to talk about my experience with the WorldCat Metadata API. And I'd like to share a few ways that I have found the WorldCat Metadata API to be useful. But before we get too far into this, just what is an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface, which probably doesn't clarify much for most of us. I think of it as an agreed upon method for two pieces of software or applications to communicate, that is, to interface with each other via programming rather than by a person typing in a question or command in real time. The link on this slide goes to a MuleSoft video that was referenced in an OCLC webinar on APIs that may be helpful to some of you. The video compares APIs to waiters in restaurants, and the waiter is like a messenger. The waiter takes your order from a menu, communicates your request to the kitchen, and hopefully brings you back the food that you requested. OCLC offers a number of APIs for WorldCat, but I'm only going to talk about the metadata one. And the metadata API does several different things that are related to bibliographic records in WorldCat. It's a read-write API because it will both fetch information about bibliographic records and write to WorldCat either by adding new records or editing existing ones. In addition, it can also add and remove holdings and work with local bibliographic data. However, I'm only going to talk about two of these, adding new bibliographic records and updating existing master bibliographic records. For me, and probably for most catalogers, the easiest way to use the WorldCat Metadata API is through MarcEdit. MarcEdit has a user-friendly interface, which many catalogers are already familiar with. In 2013, the creator of MarcEdit, the amazing Terry Reese, integrated WorldCat Metadata API functionality into MarcEdit. And so far, this is the only way I've used the WorldCat Metadata API. In order to use the API, you first have to get a WS key and a secret key from OCLC. These keys are linked to a specific OCLC logon and its permissions, and the keys are included in the API messages as a means of authentication. As you can see from the screenshot, the MarcEdit section for OCLC API preferences conveniently includes a link to request an API key. There's also a link to do this from the OCLC page that I referenced at the bottom of the previous slide. Once you have your keys, just go to Preferences in MarcEdit, and then to the bottom left where it says OCLC API Integration. Enter the keys as well as some information about your library, such as your holding symbol. Then click Validate in order to check that you've entered everything properly. Once you have all your information entered into MarcEdit, you can use the API from the Tools menu. There are three options listed under OCLC operations: Download, Update Holdings, and Update Bibliographic Records. So first, I'd like to talk about using the API to create new records. At the University of Oregon, we've only really done this for one purpose, which is to add brief records for some of our archival collections. There was a desire to get brief records into our Primo catalog and also into WorldCat for many archival collections that had only basic information in our archival information management system, which wasn't accessible to the public. One of our archivists exported these records to MarcXML. However, the records that were exported from this other software had some anomalies and didn't include all the information that we wanted. So I did some editing of the records in MarcEdit, and then I just went into the option to upload bibliographic records, selected my Marc file, and uploaded all the records at once. Most of what I've done, though, has been editing of existing records. To provide a little contextual information for my motivations, the University of Oregon is a member of the Orbis Cascade Alliance. The Alliance has a consortial implementation of Ex Libris' ALMA, which includes a network zone. And our network zone contains a common store of bibliographic records used by all the member libraries. And the network zone is populated primarily with WorldCat master records, which are updated on a daily basis when the master record in WorldCat is changed. Since so much of what we're showing to our patrons, even at our local Primo, is based on the WorldCat record, if we want to change something, we have to change it in the master record. So we have a strong incentive to correct or enhance WorldCat records. So now I'm going to talk about a few cases in which I have used the Metadata API to do this in batch. The first situation I want to talk about concerns a database that we subscribe to called History Makers. History Makers is a collection of oral history videos about African Americans. There are vendor-provided records for the individual interviews in this collection in WorldCat. There are almost 3,000 of these records. However, at the time that we loaded these records, they did not have an O for online in the form fixed field in 008. This was a problem for us because our public catalog relies on having the O in order to correctly identify online resources like streaming video. So these things were not getting the right icon information and not faceting correctly. In this screenshot, these videos are currently marked as eVideo, but that was not happening before I fixed the records with the Metadata API. The Library of Congress appears to have had a project to create authority records for many of the interviewees in the History Makers collection. However, these authority records were either created after the vendor made their MARC records, or the vendor didn't do authority control when creating their MARC records. The new authority records generally contained birth dates and were applicable death dates. However, the vendor records in WorldCat mostly contained only the plain name. Since we were looking for some data remediation projects that could be done remotely, we've had people working on updating and controlling the headings. For the interviewees, it's made the most sense to do this via manual review. However, we discovered that one of the most prolific interviewers, Larry Crow, had been traced as Crow, Larry, when in fact there was an authority record for this person under Crow, Larry F. I was able to use the WorldCat Metadata API to update over 1,500 records that had the wrong heading in a fairly short period of time. Despite my success with the Larry Crow fix, the WorldCat Metadata API is often not the best tool to update headings with. It works fine for adding new headings or other controlled fields. However, if you try to delete a controlled field, it doesn't actually work. And since it doesn't delete if you try to update a controlled or partially controlled heading, what it actually does is keep the existing heading, plus add the new version. In the example shown, I'm pretending that I want to add a relationship designator for Larry Crow. And yes, I know technically in RDA it should be interviewer parentheses expression. But these are all like that, and I decided not to go there. In the top left is the record as it started out in WorldCat. The middle shows my edited version in MarcEdit, which is what I tried to upload with the API. And on the bottom right is the result with the two Larry Crows, which I then went back and fixed. I have also used the WorldCat Metadata API to enhance records. For example, we started to display medium of performance information from 382 in our catalog. We also created several facets based on 382. Since 382 was only added to MARC in 2010 and is a fairly new field, Most of our records didn't have any data in it. We also display and facet on the Library of Congress genre form terms. And again, this is a relatively new vocabulary, and many records that could have genre form terms don't. However, the facets aren't very effective without a certain baseline amount of data. Fortunately, the Music Library Association, in cooperation with Gary Strawn, has developed a macro that you can use in connection to easily add 382 fields and genre form terms for music based on subject headings and other information in the bibliographic record. However, this currently has to be done record by record. My strategy for enhancing records was to look for things that were common and straightforward and would be easy to do in batches. I'm not a music cataloger, so I relied on the MLA macro to sort of help me identify and verify some categories of records where I could relatively safely make changes. And then basically what I did was export all the MARC records for music that originally came from WorldCat out of our consortial catalog and took the subset where there was only one 650 LCSH subject heading and no 382, since these would be the least complicated to interpret. I looked to see what the most common subject headings in this set were. One of them turned out to be symphonies. So what I did then was use the metadata API to add the genre form heading for symphonies and a 382 field for one orchestra, as shown in this record, to most of our consortial records, where this information was missing, and the record had only the single SH heading for symphonies. Now I'm going to walk through how the process of updating records via the API works in a little more detail. The first step is to download a current copy of the WorldCat records that you want to edit. MarcEdit offers a function to do this, which looks like this. For input, you have to create a text file with a list of your searches. There are several options, but I've only ever used the search by OCLC number. Then you also have to tell it where to put the records that it downloads. In this case, I've just put a file on my desktop. Once you enter this information, you just push process and wait. MarcEdit gives you an ongoing status report as shown there, where it's in the bottom left it says downloading record number such and such. When it's finished, it gives you a report as shown on the right that says how many records it's downloaded and if any have failed to download. I often get one or two that don't download for no discernible reason. After I've downloaded the records, I spend some time assessing the records. This is often the most time-consuming step. I have a few scripts that help me sort out records that have potential problems, and I do some manual review. For example, some records may already have been updated in WorldCat and just not updated in our local catalog for whatever reason, so I don't need to edit these. I try to be conscientious and careful to at least not introduce any incorrect data that isn't already there. This can be complicated. A surprising number of bibliographic records out there are self-contradictory in some way or other. Many things have complications that may not be immediately obvious. For example, midway through this project, I found out that some symphonies have vocal parts that aren't reflected in the subject headings. In this case, I figured that what I added is no worse than what's already there, but you do want to be alert for anomalies. Once I have vetted the set of records thoroughly, I add the new information. Then I run the validation function in MarcEdit just as an extra check. When I'm satisfied, I go to the Upload Bibliographic Records function in MarcEdit, select the edited file, and click Process. Again, I get an ongoing update as the records are processed. When the API is finished uploading records, MarcEdit produces a report that looks like this. It gives the OCLC numbers and also an error message if there was any problem with the update. Generally, I copy this report to Excel and sort by the results column, as shown on the right. The problems come to the top, and then I go back and look at those records individually. For certain types of problems and enhancements, using the WorldCat Metadata API can be very powerful and effective and efficient strategy. It can, of course, if you're not careful, also be a way to create a lot of havoc and mayhem in a very short period of time. but I hope my experiences have given you some ideas about the possibilities that the WorldCat Metadata API presents. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelley. If you have questions for Kelley, please feel free to put them into the chat box, and I will read them out. We did have a couple of questions come in, Kelley, while you were talking. The first one was, does the API work with an agent author?
That I don't know. I'm not sure I understand the question.
I'm also not sure. Agent author. If I had to guess, or if I'm thinking, did this work with your connection authorization?
It's linked to that, and I set this up a long time ago. But it and you go into where I didn't really review the process of how you get it. It's connected to your account where you log into the OCLC. I think it's connected to the account that I use also to log into WorldCat Collection Manager and things like that, which is then connected to some particular authorization that you use for connection. So for example, in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have done this, but the authorization that I used at the time that I set it up didn't have PCC permissions, so I can't update PCC records with the macro, and I have meant to go back and change that, but I haven't. In any event, it is connected to some sort of whatever level of authorization you have, and it won't make changes to records if you're not authorized to change them. So if you don't sign up for the API somehow connected to an authorization, say that has concert permissions, you wouldn't be able to change those records with the API.
Right. Okay, and we had some back channel chat at OCLC, and we will clarify the agent author thing, and we'll have those in the notes when we send those out. All right, so Kelley, would you use MarcEdit to batch correct and then replace in OCLC connection? Could that be another option to upload the records?
I don't know. I have not investigated that process. I know there's also an OCLC plugin that you could do some things within MarcEdit, but I haven't used it.
Then there was a comment about why didn't you add scores as a second LCGFT term?
So I think this is because I wasn't always confident of when I should be adding scores, and at least I was kind of experimenting with the symphonies thing I did I think several years ago, but when I was experimenting with the MLA macro, it would sometimes add scores and sometimes not, and it wasn't clear to me what the difference was. So I was just conservative and added the symphonies, which I knew was, as correct as it could be based on what the metadata was in the record.
Right. And then there were some questions just about how to get the OCLC key. Within MarcEdit, there's a direct link, but we'll also provide a link to the web page in the notes. Kelley, does the API web key have an expiration date, or if it's inactive that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. I have had to they've changed over time sometimes the way they do the API. So I have occasionally had to reapply, but mostly because they changed something on the back end. But that might be something that you would want to confirm with the people that sort of manage the API.
Right. There were some comments just about the controlling of the headings. I do know that when you do, as you pointed out, it does it may uncontrol the headings, or it does some interesting things with it. And we do attempt to recontrol those on our nightly process. And so even if the records don't have controlled headings, when you deal with it, then we will add them back once they get picked up that night. Kelley, did you work with PCC records at all? And did you have any problems updating them?
So I do, and it's because of the account that I used when I requested it. I was kind of conservative in the beginning, and I requested the API key using an OCLC and authorization that didn't have PCC rights, so it doesn't update those. But I believe that if you used a different authorization, if you were authorized to replace them, that you could do that.
Great. And then Adam Schiff pointed out for the automatic controlling that the 600s, of course, that are undifferentiated only have these, the subfield A, then those will not automatically get controlled because we need to have the cataloger intervention for that. With that, oh, go ahead, Kelley.
I'd say one thing about that. So with the headings, like it doesn't, when you use the API to update the records, it doesn't uncontrol any of the existing headings that are controlled. So even if it, which I think is maybe what's happening in the process that Adam described, where you replace the record, it doesn't uncontrol anything that's there. Basically, it just, and if you added a new heading, it does seem over time to control it if it has dates or something.
Yeah. All right, Kelley, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. For a couple of the questions that we didn't get to, we will follow up and also have those available in the chat. Not in the chat, in the notes that we send out after this meeting. And with that, we'd like to do our second trivia question for the WebEx poll, and Eric will bring that up. But in the meantime, the question is, on what street is the main OCLC building on? And just a little information to know where the questions came from. We did kind of get together and ask some random questions, and then when I put them together, I made up some great answers. So we'll see how everyone does. If you did say Kilgore Place, named after Fred Kilgore, then you are correct. As much as I'd like it to be the 245 Avenue, it is not. But we did get a majority of questions. Kilgore Place. North Dublin Court was actually a good educated guess because we are located in Dublin, Ohio. So I like that one as well. All right. With that, we are going to take a 10-minute break, let you get up, stretch your legs since this is a 2.5-hour session. And we will be back at the top of the hour to continue with our next presentation on the Member Merge program. Talk to you in a couple minutes. Thank you.